Good evening, and welcome to this week's edition of Sex Addiction in the News on Facebook Live, Fridays at 5. I'm Stacy Sprout, licensed psychotherapist, certified sex addiction therapist, and author of my own story called Naked in Public, a memoir of recovery from sex addiction and other temporary insanities. Thank you for joining me this evening. I created this broadcast because I'm passionate about helping to destigmatize the conversation about sex addiction, so those afflicted, whether it's individuals, couples, families, and communities, can get help now. I'll be checking the live feed at the end of the show for questions and comments if there are any. This show is intended to be educational, created for anyone who's interested in what the world is saying about sex addiction. So, let's see what it is saying. In our headline news story this evening, it was released on March 6, 2018, from The Sun in the UK, but it's aired in the United States and in Greek media also. It's titled, "My Sex Addiction Almost Killed Me." Woman reveals how her dangerous hookups nearly drove her to suicide. The author is Josie Griffiths, and it features an amazing, lovely woman that I've come to call my friend, Jace Downey. Jace and I met online because we had a similar passion for educating the public about sex addiction and to help others heal. She actually made an amazing series of YouTube videos as she was realizing that she was a sex addict and trying to figure out what was going on. And what's a fun coincidence, I think, is that the title of her video is the exact same title of my book. And she hadn't heard about my book, and I hadn't heard about her video. And we both were calling our efforts to educate about sex addiction Naked in Public. Now, that's an evocative title, and for some provocative, but I think for us, or at least I'll speak for myself, it represents the vulnerability that we're trying to share about honesty about sex addiction. So this story is about Jace, and it reads, by the time she sought help, the 30-year-old from Austin, Texas, was engaging in frequent encounters with blokes she couldn't pick up out of a lineup now. She says her sexual experiences were becoming increasingly dangerous, risky, and painful, and could have easily killed her. Jace said, for me, sex almost never felt good. The worse it was, or the less I wanted to be there, the more I would numb out. I would be driving out to meet someone and would be just like, turn around, I don't wish to be around this person, and yet I would show up and go through with it. Her addiction began to affect every area or every aspect of her life. Jace said, I could have been introducing myself to disease. I was meeting strangers in all sorts of different places, and of course not telling anyone where I was going, because then I would have to tell them what I was doing. Engaging in things in public, illegal activities that could have taken away my job. I was watching porn at work and at my office, and my office had windows everywhere. How would I have explained that to anyone had they walked by my office and saw that? It's just madness to me now. It seems insane. Loss of job, loss of income, loss of health. I've realized now, Jace says, for me, the biggest danger that I put myself in was that I had no spiritual connection of any kind. I lost my soul in addiction. In 2014, Jace started working through a suicide checklist of things to check off before she died. She said, I thought, if I just make it look like I just died, okay, that might look unfortunate, but nobody is left with any of the guilt or burden. So I was honestly checking off a to-do list when it was like a voice outside of me said, if sex interacts with brain chemicals like drugs do, can it be addictive or damaging? I looked it up, and holy heck, a world popped up where yes, absolutely, there is no sex addiction, food addiction, gambling addiction. There is just addiction. And it shows up in different forms. 2 days later, Jace went to her first recovery meeting at a local center, and she began to uncover what had sparked her addiction. Now, years and much work in recovery later, Jace is in a happy relationship and works as a self-development coach, helping people with addiction issues and other personal struggles. She said, "I've recognized that my real passion lies in helping other people get through any type of adversity. I help really amazing people who are ready to say, yes, these things have happened, but I don't want that life. I want more. I want better. I can be more." And I'm like, heck yeah, you can. And I will help you get there. You can hear more about Jace's amazing story of recovery on a podcast she recently recorded called Love Junkie, where she's interviewed by certified sex addiction therapist Sheena Tubbs. And I'll attach a link to that and this story and all the stories on my broadcast tonight on the YouTube channel when I post it. So check it out. In Partners in Families and Sex Addiction, we feature an older article from Marie Claire magazine, published there and in multiple places from August 2016. It is not easy to find news stories about partners and families of sex addicts. And I mean, you can imagine why. It's the shame, it's the taboo of the loved one's addiction that keeps many people feeling silent or wanting to be silent. Of course, many people are private and they want to keep personal information private and not expose themselves to any number of harms that can come from being out in the world. However, there are some people who do choose to talk about what's going on, and even anonymously, as this story is written. When I see people as a therapist in therapy for sex addiction of a family member or a partner, they almost inevitably feel shame because they feel that it's saying something about them or their families are dysfunctional. And I always want to get the message across that, you know, if you're in recovery, then you're working on functionality, and any family can be really affected by even one member getting into recovery. And when two get into recovery, it's exponentially powerful. So more and more, I am seeing couples and children of sex addicts and multiple generations being in recovery at one time. And these recovering families are truly transforming generations of old dysfunction into strengths. So I hope to see more stories like this one about families coming out. This one is, again, as I said, from Marie Claire magazine, and it's titled My Father, the Sex Addict. It's written by an amazing daughter whose own healing had a profound effect on her father. The author writes, "As a young girl, I knew that my father's sexual behavior wasn't normal, but I didn't realize just how much it would shape my life. My earliest childhood memory is scaling the bookshelves of my father's home office and accidentally discovering his shocking stash of hardcore porn magazines. It marked my first encounter with my father's sexuality, but it would prove far from the last. Now, 30 years later, he, once a successful businessman approaching 70, and I, the author of this story, a 36-year-old writer and mother, are striving to rebuild our relationship, one badly damaged by decades of strange behavior that we now recognize as a sex addiction." For most of us, the idea of sex addiction conjures up an image of Michael Fassbender in the film Shame. She writes, "My graying Parisian father is no film star, yet with my glamorous Haitian mother, he formed half of a handsome, jet-setting couple. When my two brothers and I were growing up, both my parents had high-flying jobs for international banks and government institutions. It meant they were often away traveling the world, while we were looked after by an ever-changing roster of nannies at one of our homes in the affluent suburbs of Paris, New York, and Washington. From an early age, we could sense the tensions pervading our parents' marriage and my father's preoccupation with other women, whom he would stare at wherever we went. To cope with our embarrassment, my siblings and I passed him off as a randy Frenchman and developed our own brand of gallows humor. As teenagers, we'd laugh at how our dear dad would leer at our girlfriends, the hideously inappropriate sculptures of copulating couples strewn about his office, or the likelihood that he had 5 or 6 illegitimate families dotted around the world as the result of various business trips. But of course, all this joking masked genuine hurt, particularly for me as the only daughter," says the author. She writes, although he was never at all sexually inappropriate with me, his behavior did impact on me. The author goes on to detail some of her own painful struggles with anorexia, promiscuity, an unplanned pregnancy, single motherhood, and choosing men who were emotionally unavailable or, like her father, sexually addicted. Realizing she was on the path laid out for her by her mother, she decided to break the family cycle of addiction and entered an inpatient treatment center to address childhood trauma and neglect. She writes, after talking about my anger with therapists, trying to understand my father's own past, and then bashing my imaginary father to smithereens, I finally felt a sense of relief and an intense amount of love and forgiveness for him. I realized he was the product of a selfish, loveless mother, and he had tried to show me love the best way he knew how, in this case by doting on her son. I clung to this feeling when, months later, I received a call from my mother in which she ranted about yet another of my father's affairs and confessed that he had been unfaithful and a sex addict throughout their 40-year marriage. The author writes, the newfound serenity I discovered allowed me to finally speak with my father about his behavior. It also spurred him to enter an inpatient treatment center in order to start recovering from his addiction. In a letter he wrote to me subsequently, he thanked me for saving him before signing off, your father who loves you with all his heart. It was a monumental step for him, a momentous step for him to accept that he had a problem and begin the process of working through it. So that article details an anonymous author's story, and what I find interesting about that story is that she went on to do her own work in an inpatient treatment center and really looking at the impact on her of her family upbringing. And then it wasn't long after she did some really intense resentment work and therapeutic work that her mom called her and actually told her out loud about her father's sex addiction. And so the family secret, which wasn't a secret at all, but it wasn't spoken about, came out. And it was after that that she talked directly with her father about his sex addiction. And then after that, he decided to get into treatment. So that doesn't always happen, as we know, but it just illustrates the power of actually languaging what's going on, because the siblings and she were talking about this for their whole lives and joking about it, but no one could find the words. And so she did the inner work, and then her mom found the words and named the disease. And then through that, the father eventually found healing, or some approached his own healing. So it's a very hopeful story in my mind. So, let's see. Our next story is our LGBTQ and Sex Addiction feature, and we have a March 16th article from the New York Times about a play called Prurience at the Guggenheim Museum. And the article is titled, They Talk About Porn in This Show. Audience participation is encouraged, by Jennifer Schlussler. Hope I'm saying that right. Christopher Green, the creator and co-director of Prurience, an immersive theater piece in which the audience members join a self-help group for pornography addicts. The play Prurience unfolds at a fictional self-help group, and there are 46 audience members, along with an unidentified number of actors who file into the museum's small Frank Lloyd Wright-inspired restaurant and take chairs from a stack and arrange themselves into a circle. Then the intimate sharing begins. As British reviews have noted, because the play was filmed first in the UK and then moved to the US, a video confirms the show is both dead serious and very funny, and far more full of fireworks than it first seems. The article goes on to say, so much immersive theater is afraid of entertainment, which is a shame. Mr. Green was interviewed recently at the museum's restaurant. He says this show has jokes, but it wants to be uncomfortable as well. Billed as an experiential entertainment, Prurience may be more discomforting than Mr. Green initially bargained for. It arrives in the midst of a boom in immersive theater where creators seem to be continually upping the ante on extreme premises, but also 6 months into the Me Too movement, when questions of sex and power are dominating the conversation. This show is about the prurient attitude we have, this fear of sexuality, Mr. Green said, but it's also about male power and what it means to stand up to it. Mr. Green, a rangy 49-year-old with a flowing pale red hair and an intimacy-inspiring manner, said he quit drinking a decade ago with help from Alcoholics Anonymous, and more recently attended another self-help group he declined to identify. But prurience grew less out of personal questions than artistic ones. He wanted the stage the least theatrical thing ever, he said, with no set, no lighting, and no formal seating. He thought about tackling modern dating and the possibilities opened up by apps like Tinder and Grindr, but after attending sex addiction groups for research, the idea of focusing on the meetings themselves clicked into place. For all the questions the show raises about consumption and addiction, the show directors agree that it's just as much about the compulsion to tell stories and the uncontrolled places they can lead. My comment is this sounds like an ambitious project, and I'm sure it's raising awareness and opportunity for discussion about porn addiction and sex addiction. I think of sex addiction as kind of the umbrella term under which porn addiction and love addiction often fall. But I think what it's showing is that connection and conversation, as opposed to isolation and secrecy, are essential ingredients for healing. In Sex Addiction and Mental Health tonight, we will consider the proposed new sex addiction-related diagnosis called Compulsive Sexual Behavior Disorder, or CSBD. Now, I talked about this on my first show, and I got some questions about, well, what exactly is it? So I wanted to go over that a little bit more based on an article. And the article reads, this is the article in online library, and I will post it when I post the show so you can check it out. But it says, compulsive sexual behavior disorder has been proposed for inclusion as an impulse control disorder in the International Classification of Diseases, version 11, due out later in 2018. And it's proposed, so it's not 100%, but it seems likely at this point from all the sources I have. The article says that the ICD-11 has become the international standard. Oh, well, no, I think this is what I'm adding this piece. The ICD-11 has become the international standard for healthcare professionals to use in diagnosing disorders, replacing the DSM in America, at least for therapists. So if this new diagnosis is included, it will create a paradigm shift in mental health. The creators of the diagnosis write, growing evidence suggests that compulsive sexual behavior disorder is an important clinical problem with potentially serious consequences if left untreated. We believe that including the disorder in the ICD-11 will improve the consistency with which health professionals approach the diagnosis and treatment of persons with this condition, including consistency regarding whether a disorder should not be diagnosed. But how is CSBD defined? Well, 6C92, compulsive sexual behavior disorder, is characterized by, quote, a persistent pattern of failure to control intense, repetitive sexual impulses or urges resulting in repetitive sexual behavior. So, let's summarize this using slightly less clinical language. What is CSBD? 1, if you have it, you can't control your sexual behavior. 2, you neglect interests and responsibilities as a result. 3, you try and fail to stop. 4, it doesn't satisfy you or it causes harm. Other important distinctions of compulsive sexual behavior disorder include that it has gone on for 6 months or more and has caused major distress or loss of self-care functioning in family, social, school, work, or other important areas. And it is not due to moral judgments and disapproval. This last point is essential to distinguish sexual behavior that might cause someone psychological distress that they're doing it, but not necessarily be compulsive. As a therapist, I am really looking forward to the legitimacy of this diagnosis if approved, because it will bring to the sex addiction therapy a sense of, okay, this is something real, and it will really help with the distracting controversy. But a key to its inclusion for women will be how we interpret sexual behavior. As research and common sense has shown us, women are more likely than men to exhibit compulsive relationship-based behavior, sometimes called love addiction or relationship addiction. For every woman that self-identifies as a sex addict, research has shown that there are almost twice as many who identify as a love addict or a relationship addict. So it will be important for mental health professionals to consider compulsive relationship-oriented behavior when applying this diagnosis to their clients or their patients, particularly their female patients. In sex addiction and entertainment news tonight, we feature a singer-songwriter named Andreas Moss from a headline in the Bristol Herald-Courier in Virginia, Washington, USA. And the title of the article is Andreas Moss supports rapper Juicy J on March 17th at Freedom Hall by Tom Netherland. And here are some excerpts from the story. Andreas Moss boarded a plane last fall to Stockholm, Sweden. He filmed a music video. Last week, he touched down in Los Angeles from London, hailed a cab, and called Bristol, Tennessee. "Hello," Moss said. "Andreas here." A budding international pop star, Moss supports rapper Juicy J at Freedom Hall. So they had an upcoming concert, which was Saturday, March 17th. "Hip-hop," he said. "I love it. I listen to a lot of rap, so it has definitely influenced my style, but it's still pop music because of my vocals." "I'm working on forgiving myself." He opened up more about himself personally in the interview. He says, "I'm working on forgiving myself, trying to make myself better, and I'm working on that while in the limelight. I love nothing about the limelight, but I think it's healthy for me and healthy for my listeners that I'm working it out in the limelight. People are brutal." Swedish-born, Moss grew up in a staunchly conservative, gospel-singing family. Hard were lessons forged in the knowledge that neither his lifestyle nor his penchant for pop music fit his family pattern. Self-esteem issues, which play out in songs including "Stuck in My Feelings," cling to Moss like a skin he can't quite shed. "I'm still working on loving myself," he said. "That song was written about my addictions. I wrote it about being stuck in a situation that wasn't good for me." Addictions, Moss said, were multiple and haunting. "I've definitely overcome a lot, but it's a daily thing," he said. "I want to be better. For 13 years, I was really lost. It started as a sex addiction, and that led to drugs. I didn't care about my life or my family." You can hear Moss's shimmering voice on the song "Lonely," his current single with Melanie Furman. It's not just a song, the article writes. When he sings, "I don't want to be lonely no more," a palpable cry frees as if from a cage into a boundless flight. "That one is crazy," Moss said of Lonely. "At that time in my life, I was, 'Hello, friend, what are we fighting for?' It had been plaguing me my entire life. I can't have this relationship that makes me so lonely." Addiction provided the relationship of which Moss referenced, the source of his being lonely. When he sings the lyrics, he's not doing so to entertain. He sings to heal himself and others. "I make a lot of my songs about addiction to be relational," Moss said. "I want addicts and people who have been through a lot of things to hear it and relate to it. Sometimes things in a song end up good and sometimes not good. That's life." Signed to Nashville's Curb Records, Moss's career seems to be on a cusp of widespread expansion. Though his debut album isn't due until late summer, worldwide airplay mounts for the handful of singles issued so far. For instance, Thinking About You has garnered more than 3 million streams on Spotify. His new song Lonely was released on February 9, 2018. About the song, Moss says, "This is another one that dives into my unhealthy relationship with addiction. I wrote this song in my car in the midst of a terrible season where I knew that this invisible force I was giving myself to would eventually kill me. I know I'm not the only one who has dealt with this. Hope this song reaches into your heart and mind." I personally have listened to this song and it is beautiful. And I will attach a link on my YouTube channel to the Spotify sample and you can listen for yourself. And you know, as an aside, I think that everyone ought to pick a recovery theme song that helps you get through the grueling times. I picked one in 2009 and I've listened to it almost 10 years and every time it inspires me. So I'm curious to the people that are watching this, do you have a song? And if you don't, maybe you can go get one. So if someone ever tells me what their song is in the comments, I'll tell you what mine is. It's kind of personal, but it's also powerful. So pick a song if you haven't. That's my advice if you're in recovery. Even if you're not. Our sex addiction book of the week this week is Walking Through the Storm by Brady C. And this book, let's see, can you see it there? From the book description, Brady C. was a professional with an Ivy League education, a husband and a father of 3, and a public speaker with a national reputation. He was respected in his church and community. He was also a sex addict who engaged in casual encounters with strangers and who stored child pornography on his computer. His double life came to an end one morning in 2004 when 12 armed FBI agents raided his house and seized his computer. His long road to recovery included 7 years in federal prison, residential treatment for sex addiction, and years of participation in 12-step programs. The support he encountered along the way made his recovery possible. Today, he recognizes that sex and pornography can be addictions, just as certainly as drugs and alcohol. In Walking Through the Storm, a story of recovery from sex addiction, he shares his long and remarkable journey with us in a brutally honest fashion. Brady C.'s story is inspirational for both addicts and their families, as well as the judicial and mental health systems that attempt to rehabilitate them. My review of this book is that it is told in a direct fashion, but I never experienced the author's voice as brutal. I found him honest. He does have an extreme story. He was arrested. He voluntarily spent 4 months in an inpatient treatment program for sex addiction and codependency. Then he was sentenced to 8 years in prison, out in a little over 7. So he writes about that experience. Brady came to realize that he himself had experienced trauma. He was sexually exploited at age 4 by a stranger in a park. He was sexually bullied at school by other boys and experienced abandonment, neglect, and chronic emotional abuse at home, as well as the trauma of being accidentally shot in the head as a teenager. I think this book would be especially helpful for anyone needing hope that you can go to prison from criminal acts as a consequence of your sex addiction and still find recovery and healing, and your family can still heal with you. It's also a warning that criminal acts incurred have severe consequences. I wish he'd been able to include a little bit more depth of empathy for the victims of child pornography that he exploited by viewing and trading their images. There was empathy in his story, but just not as much as I wanted. But it's very educational. His story is inspirational. It's a remarkable turnaround, highly informative. He's really done his homework, and it's very readable. I like the writing. So way to go to the author and his family. I know the book has already been selling well, and I think a lot of people will be helped from telling that story. And speaking of stories, have I got a story for you? So I am going to be traveling in the month of May, May and June on a couple of Fridays. I'm going to be out of town, and I've been trying to figure out what to do about sex addiction in the week on those days. And I thought, well, how about I'll find someone awesome and interview them, and then I'll show the interview instead of the show. Well, I did find someone awesome, and it's DJ Burr. And DJ is a licensed psychotherapist. He's a sex addiction specialist. He's an author. He wrote a book about his own sexual journey of recovery. And he's a podcast host. He's made 2 different podcasts, and he specializes in male sex addiction healing. He just has done a ton of work in the world, and he's a great guy. So I recorded with him recently, and I was going to show the story in May instead of this show. But the recording was so good, I decided I can't wait to show it. And so I'm actually going to put it out tomorrow. I just have a tiny bit of editing to do on the very end when we stopped the recording. And I'm going to put it out there because I don't want anybody to wait to see what it's like. So he's actually inspired me, and I decided I'm going to create a feature which is called Recovery Works, Stories of Successful Long-Term Recovery. And keep your eyes out for more of that. And be sure to watch DJ's interview. Again, I'll post it on Facebook tomorrow, and then also put it on my YouTube channel under Sex Addiction in the News. So I'm very excited I want to watch it again. I was there, and then I watched it once, and I found it healing. He's an amazing guy. And it was lots of fun. So, Sex Addiction in the News is always seeking stories about sex addiction for hope and recovery in the public media to feature on our show. If you see a story you think is appropriate, you can message it to me on Facebook or send it via email to nakedandpublicnews.com or at gmail.com. Together, we can get the word out about what the world is saying about sex addiction. Yay! Okay, so let me look at the live feed. Aw. Hi, friends. Thanks for watching. Oh, I'm reading the comments, but you can't see them. So maybe there's a story suggestion here. Oh, no, these are songs. Oh, these are people's recovery songs. Laura's story, Blessings for Heidi. Forrest Benedict, Switchfoot, If the House Burns Down Tonight, his most recent recovery anthem. Oh, I like that term. What's your recovery anthem? That's awesome. Here's another one, Thy Will Be Done. Ooh, good one. Oh, someone said maybe I should write my book. Yes, you should write your book, please. The world needs more awesome stories. And here's one. Oh, Matthew West, The Healing Has Begun. His songs always make me cry. Thank you, Jenny. And White Lion and Little Fighter. Ooh, I love it. So I'm going to go listen to these songs because I know they're going to be inspirational if people have chosen them as their anthems. So thank you for those ideas. And thank you for being here tonight. It's really been a joy to share some painful, poignant, but also good news about people talking about sexual recovery. And that's all the news we have this week. I will be back next Friday for Facebook Live at 5, and I hope you can join me there. You can catch previous episodes on my YouTube channel, Stacy Sprout, under Sex Addiction in the News, and I will attach the links to these stories so you can click and read more for yourself. You can subscribe and click the little bell on YouTube to receive notifications of when shows are posted in case you missed the Facebook show. Until next time, I leave you with this. May you feel loved, may you feel cherished, and may you love and cherish others. I'm Stacy Sprout, signing off for Sex Addiction in the News. Good night.